Good afternoon. So I'm recording a lecture of my English 101 class where we were going to discuss source citation and integration. But it occurs to me that the online English 101 could probably benefit from the same discussion. So I'm going to make it available both places. I'm assuming before I get started here that you've read and taken some notes on the sample papers that were linked in your course. Before we get to specific examples, I'd like to talk generally about the papers, particularly the student sample papers. Now, I'll note here that one of the papers that I'm going to discuss pretty extensively in this lecture is one that I haven't had the online class read, although I'd be happy to supply it to you if you're interested. Maybe I can do that in the announcements. It's not one that I've been able to add to your course yet because it was just submitted last fall. But you'll have some screenshots as we go through, so you should be able to follow my example pretty well. So the first thing to ask here is, which of these papers is most effective? And my answer is they're all effective in different ways. William Riley's Dreams of Tomorrow Delivered Today is a really good synthesis of several related inventions or technologies. His thesis is predictive. He's showing how these driverless vehicles will impact the way we do business in the world. He doesn't use a lot of verbatim text in here, but when he does quote something verbatim, he makes it count. Another paper here is called Markets Burning, and this was written, as I said, by one of my online students last term, and it's one of the best informative research papers I've ever read. She uses the compare and contrast strategy to help us connect something familiar, the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire, which is an infamous event in local history, to economic events in the 20th century. You can read more about compare and contrast organizations in Chapter 14 of your ebook. Both of these papers use sources to illustrate or give examples of a point they're making in support of their thesis. And they give credit to these sources, even when they're putting the information from them in their own words. Going on here, Nicole Pena's paper, which is from your ebook, is argumentative, but it's a good example of how writers use source materials in academic writing, and it has some helpful annotations. Kathleen Marsh's draft paper on Latin American music doesn't have a works cited page, which is something that your own drafts for this class should never lack. But it's an important example of how you can use classification to organize an informative paper. You can read more about this type of organizational strategy in Chapter 12 of your ebook. So let's look at a few examples now of the way that people give credit in an academic paper. I'll say before we go any further that the research tutorials in your ebook have more in-depth examples and ideas about all of these things and other aspects of research writing as well. You can find them in the folder that says research tutorials, and you can go to any of these and find the different sources. So take a look at this example first. This is verbatim text, so of course it goes in quotation marks. We have a choice to use a signal phrase like this. Economist Bert Eli writes, or we can do it this way, where we have Eli 93 at the end. In either case, we've still got the same verbatim text, but we just have decided to use parenthetical citation in this example. Be aware you need to use this type of citation for verbatim text, but also for paraphrase text. You have a choice to use either one. Either way, when using a signal phrase, you need to include the author's name and some verb of saying. So here's some good examples of strong analytical verbs that you can use in a signal phrase. And all of these are preferable, at least in MLA style, to according to. APA style does use according to an awful lot, but in MLA we generally use these kind of verbs, and we use present tense for this signal phrase. The reason for this is that humanities disciplines tend to be interested in ideas, which are present for analysis now. Other styles that deal with more scientific studies might be more interested in how the research was conducted or when the research was conducted. So you might see other verb tenses like past tense depending on your topic. Now here's an example of sort of the use of both tenses from Pena's Navigating. She starts with an anecdote, which is just a short illustrative story. So that would be past tense. But then note she shifts to present tense down near the bottom. Michelle Obama's struggle to choose between a professional career and so on demonstrates a challenge many women face. So it's not just in the source citation that we see the strong verbs, it's also in the analytical verbs, it's also in your own text. The other thing that's important to note here from this particular example is the name. The first time a source's name is used, its first and last name. So Michelle Obama. But then after that, in the very next sentence, it's just Obama. Obama indicated that she wanted. The thing to note is it's never just Michelle by itself. The author is not your personal friend, so be aware of that. That's one of our funny conventions in academic writing. Now, the next question is, how do we decide when to use a signal phrase and when to use parenthetical citation? Well, it really depends on what your purpose is for including the source material. You might want to show off the ethos or credibility of your source, as the author of Markets Burning does here. Bert Eli isn't just some random guy, he's an economist. Nicole Pena did the same thing in the example we just looked at. Michelle Obama isn't just any random mother. She's a former First Lady of the United States, and she's a famous working mother who had a career prior to making the choice that's being discussed here. So who said the source, who said it matters? So we use a signal phrase. But take a look at this example. Here we've got two different sources cited back to back. It would really interrupt the flow to use a signal phrase for each one. And anyway, they're really just short examples of the same kind of thing in order to make a larger point. Parenthetical citation lets you keep the focus where you want it, on the big picture that adds up to, that the smaller examples add up to create. Now, while you're reading and researching, you may see examples of citation that looks like this screenshot. This is APA style, and be aware that if you use verbatim texts or ideas that are cited like this, you still have to use MLA citation for the whole thing to show us where you saw it. Why are these different and why does it matter? Well, there are two answers. One is academic custom, and one is the discipline needs and expectations. So let's talk a little bit about APA style. APA style, it stands for American Psychological Association, and it's the standard for many disciplines, including social sciences like psychology, sociology, economics, and so on, but also for things like nursing and business. These disciplines mostly use scientific studies for evidence, and for these, the date of the study is the most important thing. MLA, on the other hand, stands for Modern Language Association. So unlike the APA disciplines, papers written in this style mostly deal with written text. The important information that's needed in the text is not the date it was written, but the place in the text where the ideas can be found. So usually it's going to be a page number. Now, of course, we frequently use internet or database sources that have no page number, so it's possible just to see the author's name in parentheses, or only in a signal phrase with no parenthetical citation at all. Here's some final notes on MLA citations. If you do have a location number, like a page number, you only use it in parenthetical citation. So for this example, it's not on page 93 of Bert Eli's article, but rather as we see it in one of these two examples. And also, if you have verbatim text that spans more than 4 lines, you need to use what's called block or inset quote format. Here's an example of what this looks like. Notice where the period goes in this case. It's before the parenthetical citation, not after. Going back to the previous slide, you can see that there, the period goes after the parenthetical citation in both instances. So keep that in mind as you're doing your work here. Now, you don't see this in any of the papers that I ask you to read for class, because short papers are usually better off using as little verbatim text as possible and a lot more of your own ideas and framework to make your points. You do need to use sources, but use them strategically so that they work for you rather than speak for you. For any use of text, short or long, you need to make sure you integrate it into your own discussion. So remember this acronym, ICE. It reminds you to introduce your verbatim text first, or your source idea, and then cite it, and then finally explain its significance to your argument. In general, the longer a verbatim passage you use from a source, the more you need to introduce it beforehand and explain its significance after. Now finally, I asked you to look at how the in-text citation relates to the works cited page. Basically, the information in the text matches up to that on the works cited page. Here we see the author mentioned in parentheses, Marx, actually QTD in Marx. We also see the source of the quote identified, which is the economist Irving Fisher. and that's in the signal phrase. This is an example of a QTD-in situation. The QTD-in lets us know that the author that I read from my paper, Julie Marks, used this other person's words in her article. I should be able to go to the Marks source and find out more about Irving Fisher if I need to. Now here's another example that we looked at earlier, and then we're going to match them up both to the works cited page. This is the Bert Eli verbatim text, and here's just a straight signal phrase. So we should be able to find both Marks and Eli on our works cited page. Well, let's see if we do. And as you can see, both names are readily visible on the work because the works cited page uses what's called a hanging indent. The left margin of the first line of each entry hangs out over the indented lines, making it easy to spot in a list, which is alphabetized. If you use a source with no named author, the same principle applies. You cite the first few words of the title in your parenthetical citation, and then somebody can easily find it in the works cited list. Remember, in this case, we alphabetize by the first important word in the entry. So you don't use a, an, or the if you have a source with no named author and you're just doing it from the title. And that's really all I have for you right now. As always, if you have questions or concerns, reach out to our fabulous library staff for help. Or you can drop in during my office hours to clean up any confusion you might have. Good luck with your papers, and thanks for watching.